Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Atlanta Press Club. My name is Christy Wooten. I'm the president of the Atlanta Press Club. Thank you for joining us today for our online Louder Milk Young series event, Voting Rights, What to Know Before You Go to the Polls, including voter protection, COVID-19 preparedness, and more. We'd like to remind you today that if you do have questions for our speakers or moderator, please type them into the chat function at the bottom of your Zoom window. Thank you as always for your support of the Atlanta Press Club simply by joining this webinar today, and also for your support at our other events. Please visit atlantapressclub.org to see what we have upcoming, including a link to register for next week's October 14th Newsmaker event featuring Atlanta hip-hop artist, rapper, entrepreneur, and author Lecrae talking about his new book, I Am Restored. On our site, you may also sponsor an event, join as a member, or donate to the club. So thank you for doing that. All right, well, we will get started today. Voting rights are on the minds of many of Georgians, especially as we get closer to the 2020 general election. The process of voting by mail has already begun. Some Georgians are planning to vote in person during early voting window leading up to November 3rd. Others will end up going to the polls on election day. So the purpose of this event is to help journalists prepare to write about voting rights and safety at the polls, and also let the general public understand what their options are when they get to the polls. So here's an overview of the topics we'll be discussing today. Segment 1, voting rights. Segment 2, COVID-19 preparedness. Segment 3, voter protection. And segment 4, of course, we will have plenty of time for all the audience members to get your questions in. So go ahead and do that in the Zoom window now. Today, we've asked Raisa Habersham to moderate the conversation. Raisa is a freelance journalist who writes about democracy and communities. Most recently, she served as a hyper-local reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Please welcome Raisa.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited. I'm looking forward to this conversation on voter rights, and it comes just ahead of the early voting, start of the early voting season in Georgia, which begins Monday. So I'm excited. I'd like to introduce our first guest now. Jamil Favors is an Atlanta-based attorney and a graduate of Howard University and the University of Pennsylvania Law School. He is here today to talk about his role as a voter protection volunteer. He left his job at a law firm in July to volunteer full-time through the 2020 election season. Please welcome Jamil.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for having me. Really excited for the conversation, and I really love and appreciate the work you all do.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Jamil, can you give us just a brief overview of voting rights and, tell us a little bit about what the role of a voter protection volunteer is?
Okay. So, when I think about a voter protection volunteer, we really are trying to make sure that everyone that wants to cast their vote on November 3rd, whether that's through an absentee ballot, whether that's through early in-person voting, or on November 3rd, that they can do that. And that takes many, many different forms. There's a team that staffs a hotline. So if you're at the polls and you have some issues, you can call that hotline and there's going to be someone to answer that question. There's a team that staffs a boiler room. And what that boiler room does is on every day of early vote in-person elections, and actually on November 3rd, there's going to be a team that are there to answer questions. And let's say you call in an issue. I always like to use this issue as an example. Let's say you go to your polling location. It was supposed to open up at 7 a.m. It didn't open until 7:30 a.m. You call that hotline. That hotline is going to get that information over to the boiler room. The boiler room and the voter protection team has the ability to advocate on your behalf so that because the polling location opened 30 minutes later, it's going to stay open 30 minutes later. Again, we're doing everything possible so that any issues that you run into as a voter, we've seen it, we've planned for it, and we'll make sure that your vote counts on November 3rd.
Good.
I could continue to go on, but I'd just like to use those three examples to let you know that we understand some of the issues and the complications that Georgia voters may run into, but we're here to help you. And I'm going to say this hotline number at least 10 times on this call, or my boss will get mad at me. So 888-730-5816. Give us a call at any time. I really mean that. If we're there throughout the day, but if we're not there if we're not there and you call in the middle of the night, you leave a voicemail, and we can guarantee that somebody's going to give you a call back.
Quickly, can you just describe, I guess, the difference between a voter protection volunteer and a poll worker? How do they differ?
Okay, so a voter protection volunteer, I am volunteering with the Democratic Party of Georgia. But if you're a poll worker, you're going to actually be a paid employee of the county in which you're working that particular poll. So, for instance, I reside in DeKalb County. If I wanted to be a poll worker, I would have to apply directly to the DeKalb County elections, the Board of Elections and Commission. But let's say that I want to be a poll watcher. If I want to be a poll watcher, I can apply with the Democratic Party. And what the poll watchers are going to do is, let's say as a constituent, you're in line on November 3rd, you run into some issue, you hadn't heard this amazing segment, so you didn't hear me say that hotline number 10 times, you'll be able to go up to that poll watcher and say, hey, this is the issue that I'm having. Can you be able to help? That poll watcher is going to have gone through some type of training. That poll watcher is going to know the hotline number that I just said by heart. And that poll watcher is going to make sure that they are able to handle any issue that you run into. And that's important, especially for this year, because as you know, there's a lot of fear this year of going to the polls, whether it's through the health pandemic or whether it's through fear of retribution of someone trying to deny you your vote. And we want to make sure that voters feel safe, they feel educated, and they go out confident that on November 3rd, their vote is cast. So again, just to round it all back, a poll worker is a paid employee from the county that you're working those polls. And me as a volunteer, I'm doing this for free and my love for democracy.
Well, thank you. Let's discuss what can go wrong at the polls, either during early voting or on election day. We have several examples up on the screen. So I'll let you begin with what you think voters should be looking out for when they go vote in person.
Okay, so there's a number of things, and thank you for showing us those examples. But the things I like to always say is you could be at the wrong polling location. That's a chance. It happens. You can forget your identification. You can get there, and the poll worker will say that you're not registered. You're not registered to vote at that particular county or that particular location. Or you can get there, and the polling location won't let you come in. So we've game planned all of those things, and I'm here to tell you some things that you can do to make sure that doesn't happen. So let's say you're at the wrong polling location. So what we want you to do on the day before you decide to go to vote, and the day that you actually decide to go vote, check the website, and you can go to mvp.sos.ga.gov. That's where you can confirm your registration. That's also where you can confirm what polling location you're to vote at on November 3rd. But that's if you're voting on November 3rd. Let's say you want to vote during the early voting period, which is from October 12th, which is next Monday, to October 30th. During that time period, you can vote at any polling location in your county. And I want to make sure that's clear. Any polling location in the county in which you're registered in. So let's say I'm registered in DeKalb County. I can't go to Fulton County and vote at any polling location. I have to vote in DeKalb County. And these are some of the things that, not every voter knows. So again, by voting early, it allows you to have more opportunities and more places to vote. And whether that will naturally mean that you're going to run into less individuals and feel safer as a voter.
Well, thank you for that. I wanted to ask you also, you mentioned that you may run into a situation where you're not being allowed into the polls. And can you kind of talk, I guess, a little bit about how that might happen and what are the steps that voters should take if they feel their rights are violated?
Absolutely. If you are there before 7 p.m., you should be allowed to vote. Let's say it's a long line, but you are in line before 7 p.m., you should be allowed to vote. And if someone tries to tell you that, no, you're too low, you're too late, the polling location has closed, that's when we would want you to do one of two things. One, see if you can find a poll watcher. They'll be able to assist you. Two, that's when you call that hotline, 888-730-5816. Too often, there's some times when poll workers may not know the rules and the laws, because we're all human. But that's why we have these mechanisms in place. And I want to make sure we reiterate this. If you're in line before 7 p.m., do not get out of line until you have voted, and don't let anyone take your vote away. If someone does try to take your vote away, report it, and the voter protection team we're going to do our best to help you right there.
Thank you. We have a question from a journalist in the chat. His name is Haston Willis. He wants to know, how confident are you that changes made since the primary will lead to smoother voting operations on Election Day?
I'm actually pretty confident. What we realized is that in the primaries, we were battling a couple of things. We were battling the pandemic, we were battling new voting machines, and we were battling a lot of the unknown. Now, I think there's been enough publicity through programs like this to let individuals know, waiting to November 3rd, we want you to get out your vote, but that may not be the best option for you if you want to have a safer option to vote. So what we've seen is a larger number of individuals requesting absentee ballots. So I know you may say, oh, just because they request their absentee ballot, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to vote. They're going to vote with that absentee ballot. You're absolutely right. But we can just assume that most individuals who are requesting absentee ballots, they're planning to use them. Two, we're making sure that individuals know about the early voting period and that you can vote at any location in your particular county. And why is that important? Because, why would I, some individuals will think to themselves, why would I stress myself out on November 3rd where I know there are going to be lines when I can stretch it out and have more locations? And three, we're doing a lot of voter protection training to make sure individuals know, here are your rights, here's where you can get support. And so what we're hoping is that although the primaries, there's a lot of bad publicity in this state, we took that, we listened, we saw all the reports, and hopefully through these mechanisms of making individuals aware of what their options are, individuals who choose to vote on November 3rd won't be overburdened because the lines will be shorter, they'll feel safer, and they'll know their rights.
Good. We have another question. Is it too late to sign up to be a poll watcher? And if not, where can I sign up?
It is not too late to sign up to be a poll watcher. And I would ask that you go to georgiademocrat.org, and on there, you'll find a resource center to be a poll watcher.
I know you
and
mentioned, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was just saying, I'll be sure before the end of the presentation when I'm not talking to put those links in the chat for you.
I know you mentioned that there's a lot of training that is involved in being a poll watcher. Can you talk a little bit about what that training entails?
Yes, absolutely. So what we want to make sure you understand is all the rules and the regulations around voting. So one would be, hey, the polls are supposed to open at 7 a.m. They're supposed to close at 7 p.m., but that's not always going to happen. Maybe there are machine malfunctions. Two, what happens when there's an individual who feels that their rights have been violated? How do you report that issue? How do you run that issue up the chain? And how do we get that particular voter the support that they necessarily need? I've been through the training because I was a poll watcher before. It's not hard training, it's not long training, but it's valuable training because we want to make sure that you as a poll watcher feels comfortable answering the many questions that you're going to receive. And lastly, what I'll say, this year, if we're being completely honest, there's going to be training on what to do if there's some sort of harassment or you feel that there's some sort of threat or fear towards you for trying to protect the polls and trying to protect individuals who are trying to vote. that's something that we have to address. And I think that's something that must be put on the table. And with that, we're telling individuals, if you were a normal, regular individual who wasn't serving as a poll watcher, what would you do if you felt that there was some type of fear? You would report it. And we don't want anyone to be a superhero. We want you to report it, and we'll take it from there. And again, these are things that we would think are intuitive, but they always aren't. So we want to make sure we have the training to put those things in place. So poll watchers and people who, are putting themselves at some sort of risk feel more comfortable in that process.
One thing to note: can poll watchers speak with voters within their poll zone? Are they allowed to do that?
There's a boundary. I'm not for sure that the actual boundary. I believe it's 100 feet. But a lot of poll watchers, they'll have badges. They'll be definitely identified, because those poll watchers have to be credentialed through that particular county.
You mentioned the voter protection hotline number, which we do have on screen. Is there any other contact information that maybe voters should know?
No, I think the voter protection hotline will be the place that you go if you have any issues. What I will say is that voters should know mvp.sos.ga.gov. And that's so important for a number of reasons. We want voters to be well-informed voters when they show up to the polls. Your ballot could be pretty long come November 3rd. So, if you go to mvp.sos.ga.gov, if you requested an absentee ballot, you can see that. If your absentee ballot has been sent to you, you can see that. If your absentee ballot has been received, you can see that. What I personally think is the most important thing is that you actually get to see a sample ballot. And if you look at that sample ballot, it allows you as a voter to do research on the candidates. And one thing that I've been making sure that I emphasize is that on everyone's ballot are going to be ballot measures, which are questions that the state legislatures want you to opine on. I'm an attorney, and sometimes I read those questions and I get confused. So I always like to go look at the sample ballot, look at the questions, research the questions, so that when I do show up to the polls to vote, I can make an informed decision from there. So the resources that I would like to reiterate are the hotline, which is 888-730-5816, and your My Voter page, which is mvp.sos.ga.gov.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Can I jump in with a question? So we did have the Secretary of State on a couple of weeks ago, and we unfortunately didn't get to ask about because you're an attorney, you can tell us. So we talked about the different distances from the polling place where certain rules apply in terms of interaction with voters. Do you know, because of COVID-19, which we will be getting to some of those aspects in just a few minutes, but because of COVID-19 and the potential for lines to stretch really far beyond, if someone is being harassed in a line and they are a block away, they still call, or if they're 2 blocks away, they still call the voter protection hotline, right? I just wanted to see from a legal standpoint, if anything, if there's anything that would change that because of COVID-19 and because of the distance that is recommended for people who are in the lines, and where those lines might end up going if they're really long.
So you're absolutely right. So what we've tried to do with the counties is make sure that they're, when you're looking at a polling location, one of the things you're going to look at is whether there's an overpass, just in case if there's rain, and whether there's adequate parking. Now, I will freely admit what we saw in the primaries is that there were lines that wrapped around the corner, and because people didn't want to be so far away from the polling location, they didn't social distance. If you feel like you're being harassed, you're absolutely right. You should call that hotline. And a hotline, the voter protection team does have a legal team on board. So from a legal standpoint, we'll be able to help you with any affidavit and take any legal actions that you feel may be necessary. And thank you for asking that question, because I think it's particularly critical. And from a line standpoint, I must keep reiterating this. If your discomfort is about the line, that's why we're really suggesting that individuals take advantage, if they have the opportunity, the options of the other early voting options, which will be the absentee ballot in the early voting early voting locations. Because if you're voting early, you're going to have more days and you're going to have different times, and the likelihood that you're going to be in the line that you just described is slim to none.
And one more follow up on that. I know that one of the things about voting in Fulton County versus DeKalb or whatever is we did have some guests on a few weeks ago to talk about State Farm Arena and how that is being used in Fulton County only. Is that correct? We want to reiterate that if you live in DeKalb County, you cannot vote at State Farm Arena during early voting. That is correct, right?
I want to reiterate, your early voting locations are going to be stipulated to any early voting location at in your particular county, the county that you are registered in. And also, I want to also make a note that just because something is to be a polling location on November 3rd, don't automatically assume that that's going to be an early voting location. Did I say that clearly? Because I want to make sure I get that across, because what we've seen is that, oh, well, I know that in the primaries and, last year in November, I voted at this particular location, so I can just go there for the early vote. That's not necessarily the case. So again, if you want a list of your early voting locations, that's where you can go to mvp.sos.ga.gov, or you can call the hotline and we'll help you find the closest early vote location to a particular location that you address that you give us.
Okay, and we have one more coming in. So it's about your ID. So I know that if you're inside the polling place, you may not have access immediately to voter protection other than the hotline. So if your ID is rejected, is that something that you all help them with, or is that something they have to seek through a different avenue?
No, that is something that we can certainly help you with. What I would suggest is that, yes, if your ID has been rejected, it's going to depend at what stage. If let's say it's 6:50, if it's 6:50 on November 3rd and your ID is rejected and you don't have and you feel like it's being wrongfully rejected, that's when I would say give a call to the voter protection hotline. But let's say you feel that, oh, maybe I brought the wrong ID and my ID is at home. If it's 6:50 p.m., you don't have time to go home. That's where we would suggest that you request a provisional ballot. You are eligible to ask a poll worker for a provisional ballot, and they must give it to you. Now, when you use that provisional ballot, that means you're going to have to bring in your ID and cure that ballot during the curing period. And that's going to be 48 hours after the election. So you would have to cure it by November 5th. And what that would mean is you go get your adequate ID and you take that adequate ID to the Board of Elections board, to the voter election. Your voting elections board, your elections board in your particular county. So, but let's say you're voting in the early voting period, you go on the 12th and you forget your ID. If you have the opportunity, what I would suggest is to go home, give the adequate ID and come back when you can. While a provisional ballot is a right that you have as a voter, what we prefer is that you vote through a normal ballot.
Well, thank you so much, Jamil, for that. We really appreciate it. One more question that's popped up is it true that people can't wear certain things to the polls? I know there was a concern about whether or not you can wear your mask to the polls because of COVID. But is there certain things that you can, are there things you just absolutely cannot wear at the polls?
I'm not aware of things that things, unless something is completely derogatory, racist or something of that nature, but you can absolutely wear your mask to the polls. I just want to make sure I reiterate that you can absolutely wear your mask to the polls. Outside of that, I would imagine that it's akin to any other thing. If it's sexist, derogatory, racist, or anything of that nature, then the poll worker and the poll manager would have a certain discretion there. But then that would be because you're putting other individuals at risk or discriminating or something of that nature. But your mask you can absolutely wear at the poll.
Sure. Another question popped up from another viewer. Is it true that each precinct is to have a paper backup at the location to match ID in the event that elections, it went away, in the event that, I guess to verify your ID, is it true they have to have a paper backup?
Yes, that is absolutely true. Each precinct is supposed to have a paper ballot roll, so where they would be able to look up you as a voter and match your ID up there. Yes, that is true.
And what if you do receive an absentee ballot, but someone decides they want to come into the poll and vote? What do they do with their ballot?
Thank you for that question. If you just because you requested an absentee ballot, that doesn't mean you can't vote in person. That just means you can only not vote in person if you've already voted your absentee ballot. You know, if you've already voted your absentee ballot, when you try to vote in person, there's going to be a notation on your name stating that you have already voted. But if you have your absentee ballot and you say for some reason, you know what, I want to go in the early voting period on November 3rd because I want to have that feeling or I want to get that sticker. You can take your absentee ballot with you, or you can throw the absentee ballot away and then go to the polls and you'll be able to vote normally there.
Okay. Revisiting a previous question, I know you said you can wear the mask, but there's a question about if you can wear clothing of a particular candidate at the polls. Would that be perceived as, I guess, campaigning for that candidate?
Well, the you so candidates can't put signs and or publications within 100 feet of the actual precinct, but you as a particular voter, they won't be able to, if you're not the candidate or you're not on the candidate's team, they won't be able to stop you from that. Again, I would just go ahead and reiterate, as long as it's not derogatory, sexist, racist, and the poll manager and the poll worker has some type of issue and that's brought up, I think that's a different conversation. Then no, you're perfectly fine.
Oh. Well, thank you so much, Jamil, for sticking with us and answering audience questions. I really appreciate it. Is there anything you wanted to add?
Yes, thank you so much. I just wanted to add, and this is for individuals who may be elderly or have a physical disability. If you're elderly, if you're 75 years old and you're 75 years old or older, you're entitled to go to the front of a line from 9:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. I want to reiterate, 75 or older, you can go to the front of the line from 9:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. And also, every polling location must have at least one location where a voter can be seated. As you go into the polls, most polling locations, you have to stand up, but they must accommodate an individual who would like to be seated. That's something that individuals don't know, and it's something that where if you don't feel like that accommodation is being met for you, you call the hotline. And what we would hope is that we have the poll watcher there go speak with the poll worker to get you some assistance.
Well, thank you again so much. We really appreciate it. And I know you mentioned that there were some things you were going to put in the chat, some information there. So definitely if you can provide that for viewers, that'd be appreciated.
Thank you.
I actually have a question for you, Janelle. I noticed I'm in DeKalb, and I noticed during the primaries, I know there's no campaigning within 100 yards or 100 feet.
Yards, your apologies.
Okay.
You're absolutely right. I said feet. Apologies. That's not
No,
far at all.
no, I'm just being fair. But I did notice, I noticed a lot of campaigning while people were standing in line. What could people, if I'm standing in line and I see that, who should I call?
So that's something that you can let the poll workers and the poll managers know. And if you say to yourself, you know what, they're not taking my complaint or what I'm saying seriously, I think that's also something you can call to the hotline, and we can call the poll watcher there, and we can escalate the situation from there. What I would imagine is happening. You call the hotline, we take your name, we take your number, we take your complaint, and then we escalate it. And we if someone, I don't want to give my number, I don't want to give all that information. We're using that information just in case we have to put forth an affidavit, and we're also using that information just in case we have any follow-up questions that we want to get a wider story of what happened.
Great, thank you. I will be using that.
I mean, I would love to tell you that every polling site is the same, but that's not necessarily the case. We can only tell you what the rules and regulations are in hopes that they're being followed. But if they aren't, that's where we give you the resources to where you give us a call and we help you, put you in the best position to make sure that they are being followed.
Great, thank you.
One quick question, this is kind of related to the hotline. Another viewer says that they've seen instances where a voter requested, their absentee ballot, but they didn't bring it with them to their precinct during the primary, and they were directed to go back home and submit the vote in that order. And in a case like that, should they call the voter protection hotline? Like, how should that have gone?
Absolutely, you should definitely call, because that's you should definitely call the voter hotline. Don't leave if you are there in person and you want to vote. And the reason that is that who's like, that poll worker who told you that, they're assuming that, one, you received your absentee ballot, two, it didn't get lost, or your dog didn't eat it or something. And that's not an assumption anything can make. The only way you cannot go vote in person if you've requested an absentee ballot is if you voted by absentee ballot. But if you have not done that, you should be able to vote in person in the early voting period, or on November 3rd. But this gives me leeway to note. Let's say you have you requested your absentee ballot, you voted. You voted by absentee ballot, but you don't want to mail it in, and you don't want to put it in a drop box. You can actually take it to an early voting location. You cannot do that on November 3rd, but you can do that before the during the early voting period.
Well, thank you again so much for joining us today. Again, thank you. And I know you mentioned the resources earlier. If you can include that in the chat, that would be very helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now we're going to transition a little bit and talk about COVID-19 preparedness. As everyone very well knows, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and it's still important for Georgians to exercise caution when heading to the polls. One thing that Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger told us is that voting by mail is probably the safest method of voting in terms of the least amount of contracting the virus, potential exposure. And we have kind of also a list of key dates for you coming up. The one that recently passed is the voter registration deadline, which was October 5th. However, for those that are registered, October 12th through October 30th, you can early vote in person in the county of which you're registered. And November 3rd is election day for the general election. So if you haven't submitted your absentee ballot, or you didn't plan on early voting, then election day is the day that you would cast your ballots. As far as how to minimize that COVID-19 impact, especially if you're heading out to the polls, it's highly encouraged this election season to vote by mail if possible, especially if you're at high risk. As Jamil mentioned, older residents, 75 and older, can go to the poll, go to the front of the line at the polls from, I want to say 9:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. And correct me if I'm wrong, to cast their ballots early so that they're not out and about later in the day. Another way to minimize risk is to wear a cloth face mask in public. And as Jamila just said, that they're not going to turn you away if you do have on your mask, and your poll workers will likely have masks on as well when you go out to the polls. Also, wash your hands frequently. That's basic hygiene, so wash your hands frequently. Another one is stay at least 6 feet away from others while you're in the precincts and in line. And again, we want to remind you that early voting is between October 12th and October 30th. We also wanted to let you know that the CDC has extended guidelines for how to protect yourself and others while voting. Polling places are expected to provide signage about keeping your distances, as well as hand sanitizer. These protocols are likely to differ between polling places. It's important for voters to realize that they are individually responsible for following guidelines, including bringing your own mask or face covering. And more information on that can be found at the CDC website, which is cdc.gov. And we'll be transitioning into segment 3 of our presentation, which is voter protection. So we're going to welcome our next featured speaker, Christopher Bruce. And before we begin, Krista, is Christopher Bruce geared up and ready?
I hope so.
Oh, okay, good. I didn't see you pop in, so I wanted to be sure. So I'll go ahead and introduce you to Christopher Bruce. Christopher Bruce is the political director for ACLU of Georgia. Mr. Bruce has been a leader in the fight for civil rights and liberties across the state and country. He led a campaign against suppressing the Black vote in South Atlanta by preventing the closure of polling locations in majority Black districts during the 2016 mayoral election. In his first year as a lobbyist with ACLU of Georgia, Chris defeated a bill which added sentencing enhancements purposefully targeting Black Lives Matter protesters. Bruce graduated cum laude from Georgia State University and obtained his law degree from the University of Georgia. He has been featured in publications such as the Wall Street Journal and National Public Radio, and has been a guest lecturer at many universities, including Harvard Law School, University of Georgia School of Law, and Emory University. Please welcome Christopher Bruce, who will speak for a few minutes about voter protection, and then we will get to your questions.
Okay, so this is my time?
Yes, it is.
Go ahead and talk. Okay, perfect. I just want to let everyone know that the ACLU of Georgia is a nonpartisan nonprofit that basically upholds your civil rights, everything that's under the United States Constitution, your Bill of Rights, the Georgia Constitution, and all just laws that have been passed therein. The reason why I say just laws is because there are a lot of unjust laws that are on the books right now and are being used in certain ways to really target certain types of groups. So forums like this are very important to make sure that people know their rights, know what they can do at polling precincts, and know what they shouldn't do at polling precincts. So thank you for having me. Thank you for having the ACLU to speak on this very important topic as we are facing one of the biggest elections of our lives. So going into voter protection, what's out there protecting you? Really, again, you. It's really what you have in your mindset of saying what can turn you away from the polls and what can't. But as we saw in the June 9th primary election that happened in Georgia, which really did not go that well for us, we decided on launching a poll worker recruitment program. We decided that one of the reasons why June 9th did not go that well is because a lot of the people who were poll workers were elderly or the most susceptible to COVID-19. So one of the statistics that we always say, the average age of a poll worker in the state of Georgia, 72 years old. So if we're talking about the population that is most susceptible to COVID-19, it's that one. So when they say they're not gonna work the polls, it shouldn't be up to them. It should be up to us to really fill in those gaps of having people who are less susceptible, lawyers to get into this, and also people who can work the new machines that Georgia just bought. So the ACLU of Georgia has teamed up with various other organizations, and we personally have recruited I believe we're over 2,000 individuals who signed up for our program to work the polls. Now let me talk briefly about working the polls. If you're tired of hearing about conversations dealing with voter suppression, if you're tired of hearing about voter confusion, then you can do something actively to do something about it, which is working the polls. A poll worker is basically, you have 3 qualifications. You have to be 16 years of age, which means that high schoolers can be poll workers. College students can be poll workers. Anyone basically can be a poll worker as long as A, you are a resident of that county, or you are a government employee of that county. You cannot be in DeKalb County, resident in DeKalb County, and be a poll worker within Fulton County. You just can't do it. You also have to be able to speak English, but we are looking for individuals who can speak other languages as well. So again, you will be at the forefront of what's happening right now when it comes to making sure that lines are lower. You can get in and get out and vote as quickly as possible. As far as information that goes, a lot of times a conversation comes up, people will go to a polling precinct saying that they turned in their absentee ballot, and yet they do not see that it's being counted by that day. Excuse me. They realize that it has not been counted, or of course you can look this online, of saying my absentee ballot has actually been counted for. So they may go in and say, well, I would like to still vote in person to make sure my vote counts. You need to make sure that your absentee ballot has been canceled. And every polling precinct goes through a certain procedure of canceling your absentee ballot. Make sure before you sign anything or anything else happens that your absentee ballot has been canceled. And you can request that as well. And then go vote in person. But it's these type of things that people need to be aware of to make sure that they're voting safely, and they're voting properly.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. I know that you mentioned that you all have recruited 2,000 poll workers so far. Are you looking for more?
Yes.
And if so, how can people, sign up to be a poll worker with you all or through you all?
Put it in the chat. Thank you for that question. If you go to acluga.org/poll worker, it will pull up. You can sign up. And it's really just that easy.
You mentioned also that to be a poll worker, you also have to do it in your county that you're living in. Are there efforts by the ACLU of Georgia to kind of change that so that maybe other residents can go to rural counties and volunteer there where there's also need?
Funny that you bring that up. Yes, that is exactly what the ACLU of Georgia was trying to do in collaboration with the Secretary of State's office. The ACLU of Georgia worked with the Secretary of State to change a piece of legislation, Senate Bill, I believe it was Senate Bill 436. This has happened over the summer. And within that provision, we actually lowered the age from 75 to 70 so people can get into the lines. I think it should be 65 personally, but 75 to 70. And also, again, with changing the state law of saying you can work the polls in any county possible. Unfortunately, that legislation did not pass at this time, but we're going to go back next year in the next legislative session and try to cure this problem.
Good. I know you touched on this a little bit about you all recruiting poll workers. Beyond recruiting poll workers, what else is ACLU of Georgia doing to ensuring to reducing voter suppression, and what further role do they have in this election season?
Yes, thank you for that. And I'll speak on more of the legal rounds first, and then I'll go into more of the political. So I'm the political director, so I don't want to go too much in my colleague for legal. The ACLU of Georgia is looking for anyone whose absentee ballot has been rejected by their county to make sure that you contact us. And if you contact us, we will look into the issue and try to help you as much as possible to make sure that your vote has been counted. People are already sending back their absentee ballots, and we expect thousands of people to be rejected, and most of them people of color. So if you have any problems dealing with your absentee ballot, once you send it in, please make sure you contact us. That's on the legal realm. The political side, again, making sure that we're working with the counties and the Secretary of State for poll workers to be properly prepared, not only with training, but with PPE equipment. We're also launching a legal observer program or poll monitoring program so that we will be at the polls. And if someone has an issue there and the poll worker cannot help you, come out to see us in one of our blue vests. We can tell you and pull up where on your My Voter page, what proper precinct you're supposed to be voting at, are you properly registered, or any other pieces of information that can actually be provided. So we are going to be right there at the forefront trying to help people vote.
Can you talk a little bit about how one can become a part of the Legal Observer Program? Are there any prerequisites they must meet? Like, do they have to be an attorney to be a part of the Legal Observer Program?
Yes, happy to say so. You do not have to be a lawyer or in the legal field to be a legal observer. You just have to be a concerned citizen to do so. You do have to be 18 years and older though. So we just want to make sure that people, all you have to do is go through one of our trainings, and then we will place you somewhere. And don't worry, you don't do this by yourself. We always say you do not legally observe alone. We also bring in another person to pair you with, or if you want to legal observe together, you can do that. We did a great job in May when all this was, the protests were happening in the city of Atlanta, of training over 1,000 legal observers in 3 days who were deployed in the city of Atlanta and throughout Metro Atlanta when it came to these protests. And I can honestly say that the amount of incursions that happened between protesters and police really went down once you saw a legal observer on the scene.
You know, you mentioned May, but, you know, we also had the next month, June primaries. You know, what were some of the things that your legal observers saw then and that they're kind of preparing for this upcoming election season?
Well, one, as the ACLU, again, organization that is prepared to defend your civil rights and civil liberties, we love the idea of people being out in the streets and voicing their opinion when it comes to governmental affairs, exercising their right to a freedom of assembly in any form or fashion. So know that that is a constitutional right of yours to exercise at any moment and in any instance within the realms that are placated within. So legal observers were really seeing thousands of people out there voicing their opinions in a peaceful, productive type of way. There were other things that were happening at times. So of course, incursions that were going on that were videotaped, and we would actually give assistance or refer to certain lawyers if a situation happened. But basically, we're there to be observers. We're not protesters. We're not with the police. We are a third-party independent group, just making sure that your civil rights and civil liberties are being upheld.
Good to know. I asked this to Jamil Favors earlier, and I want to ask you this. You know, since the June primaries, there have been some changes that have been made across the state. I know that they want to kind of amp up a few things just to ensure that people don't feel like they're standing in these long lines and that they just want to be turned away. You know, have the changes that you've seen made, did they put you a bit more at ease, or even ACLU of Georgia at ease about how this election season could potentially turn out?
No.
Really?
Now, so here is the kicker, right? And I'm telling you, my staff, we have been on calls with the Secretary of State's office, the County Board of Elections. They are working, and they are working hard. So I will give it to them that they are doing what they can do to change the election. I think that Georgia has been so woefully behind when it comes to making sure that everyone can vote. That is so much at one time. I'm still wary about what's going to happen on November 3rd, or even early voting at this time. All of the voting locations have not been staffed. You've heard of other issues that happened on June 9th, some in August 11th, some on September 29th with the John Lewis seat that has to be filled. Of still people not being able to get into the location on time. Somebody didn't have the keys, the right equipment's not there, they're not charged or prepared. Voting is not exactly the easiest job, but with hard work and with a clear communication with the community, you can make this happen. So when it comes to polling location closures, this is something else with Senate Bill 436. We wanted to be able to send out notices to people either via text messages or emails of letting them know your polling location has been closed. Here's your new one. Instead of you going to that one polling location and then having to be moved to another polling location. There's those simple little fixes that have not happened that still have me concerned about it. When it comes to absentee ballot cancellations, you still need to make sure that the process is going in a certain form or manner. And this could really hold up the line. So I don't know if it's the most effective or efficient way. But I will still say, and end on this point, that the counties are trying. Could the counties be doing more? Yes, most definitely. But they need to hear more from the community about what exactly do they want to make sure that voting is safe, easily, and accessible in the state of Georgia.
Good, good. One question I did have, I know you mentioned the safety aspect of it. As you know, we're in a pandemic. You know, are you comfortable at least with the measures the state has taken to kind of ensure even poll worker safety and to an extent voter safety going into the election season?
I voted in person and I felt very safe going to vote. Of course, I was wearing the mask. I was wearing gloves, and people around me were socially distancing 6 feet apart. So that was one polling location. I have gone to other polling locations where that has not happened. So I believe it just matters on where you are and the type of situation you have, which is again why we have such an emphasis of people signing up to be poll workers. Because if you know these things, you're the one who's at the front line enforcing them.
Good. One final question for me before we open it up to the audience. What are, I guess, 3 things that you would say a voter kind of needs to do to kind of prepare themselves going into the polls? I know I've seen people mention having a voter plan, but what are like a few things that you think voters need to prepare themselves going into casting their ballots?
Oh yeah, that's pretty much it. Make sure you have your voting plan. And that voting plan could be, I'm voting absentee ballot, I'm voting early, or I'm voting on November 3rd. With all that, you have different increments within it. If you're voting absentee, have you gotten your ballot yet? Have you already made your request for it? Has it come in? When do you plan on mailing it back? Or do you plan on dropping it off in a drop box before the deadline? Early voting, do you know your early voting precinct? What day are you going to go? And what happens if they try to give you a provisional ballot? And the same thing on November 3rd. Are you prepared to wait in line for hours if you go on November 3rd? Are you prepared to find the right parking? Do you know where the area is, or how do you get there? Are you going to be prepared just in case there are other things such as voter intimidation or tactics that are being used? It's these things that people really need to think about when it comes to voting.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. We have one other question, I believe. I may ask this person to maybe rephrase, but it says, how reliable is the reprogramming that was required? If that person wants to elaborate a little more.
In the meantime, I have a question too, directed at both Mr. Bruce and Mr. Favors, is when you're at the polls, so for example, what is the difference between certain parts of Georgia or even certain parts of Atlanta in terms of the concentration of the number of poll workers? Is that relative just to the population, or are there certain areas you're really concerned that maybe have a history of incidents at polling places? I don't know how you look at that geographically and how the work is done in terms of where to concentrate poll watchers when you're kind of putting your plans together.
Well, I can jump into this real fast. When it comes down to it, traditionally, communities of color have had the hardest time voting. So they've had the longest lines, lack of provisional ballots, lack of the proper equipment or setups when it comes to it. So the amount of poll workers at certain precincts, that's determined by your county. And certain counties have not exactly staffed certain polling precincts, especially in communities of colors, as much as they should have, or they haven't picked the right area to do it. In my bio, one of the things that we were mostly concerned about was closing down a polling location where seniors had voted at for years, and they did not have any type of transportation to get it to another spot. These are the things that the Board of Elections needs to hear from the community to make sure that, one, is safe, making sure they're abiding by all COVID-19 plans or any other plans. It's easy, making sure that any and everyone, it doesn't matter if you're elderly or you have a disability, you should be easily able to vote. And of course, accessible to any and everyone when it comes down to it. So our poll monitors will be launched into mostly communities of color to have places where it goes into long lines traditionally for anything else. So when we launched our poll worker program, which is separate, we told the counties, our volunteers that we're helping to train, we want them placed at the areas where you had the longest lines, because we have faith in our volunteers that they're going to change that. And that's what happened during the August 11th primary runoff. Everywhere that you had an ACLU volunteer, the poll location opened on time, it closed on time, and you had a very minimal wait time. I hope that answered the question.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, Bryce, I didn't mean to interrupt. I didn't know if the person had gotten their question together yet.
No, no, I think they brought up the fact that some candidates were omitted. I must believe they mean from the ballot, and the voting system required correction. And so her question is, how reliable do you believe that reprogramming or recorrection of the system, how reliable do you feel it is?
I'm just assuming and judging by Mr. Bruce's face, but I'll say something that he said earlier. The counties are working hard, but do we want to be completely reliant? Absolutely not. Do we want to go in with, do I think voters should go in completely cynical that it's going to work? I don't think that as well. I don't think that's happening as well. There were issues that happened in the primaries, and those issues have been brought up to each county. And what we're hoping is that before we get there, before we get to even November 3rd, we'll catch some of those issues in the early voting period, so that it doesn't affect as many voters. So that's why we always say, if you do see an issue, we don't want you to keep this issue to yourself. Report this issue, like Mr. Bruce said. Tell it to your community. Tell it to the ACLU watcher that may be there. Tell it to the voter protection unit watcher that may be there. And by you telling it to those individuals, the issue gets escalated, and we're able to eradicate the issue for the next voter that's going to come.
Great. So I think
That add a little bit more to that.
Oh yes, please do. Please.
Because I don't know if the person who was asking the question was talking about an issue that happened probably about 2 weeks ago, where during the audit process, the Secretary of State's office and other offices found out that if you went back and forth between your Senate candidates, an error would happen on the machine, and all machines had to be reprogrammed together. So these are the type of things where you have to go through an audit process. So luckily they caught that, and they caught that in time, and reprogramming is supposed to be happening right now. I'm not sure if the Secretary of State's office or local counties have done that all together, but as Mr. Favors has talked about earlier, you have to have a plan, and you have to have a backup plan all together. And if you can do that, you can be able to vote in the state of Georgia.
That sounds like a good place to leave it. And so everybody getting their voting plan together. First of all, thank you to this tremendous panel today. I know Christopher Bruce stepped in at the last minute for us when Sean Young was unable to attend from the ACLU of Georgia. So we really appreciate you doing that and adding your voice to this. And of course, to our moderator, Raisa Habersham, and Jamil Favors, attorney, who has an incredible story of leaving his job to devote these months of his life to save democracy at the polls. So no, we appreciate that. And thank you so much. Please note to our audience that this event will be available online later at atlantapressclub.org and on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to register for next week's Newsmaker featuring Lecrae. Again, today you've been watching Voting Rights, part of our Louder Milk Young series. And we hope you'll visit atlantapressclub.org, sign up for our next events, donate, become a sponsor, all those fun things. Thanks again to all our panelists today, and thank you again. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.